Alright, welcome back guys. So in this video, we're now going to start talking about how to actually charge subconscious paths, right? So we're going to go over the basic details, the basic framework in this video, and then in the next couple of videos we'll kind of go over slightly more detailed specifics, right? Just little things I kind of want to focus on more directly, right, after talking about this. Right, so as you can see, the process is pretty it's very similar to charging emotions, but there are slight differences, right? So to go over this first point, you would hold the intention. You would start off by holding the intention to perform in a specific way until you enter a transcendental state. Now that deviates a little bit from what we said before for emotions. So we said hold the intention to feel an emotion, right, until you enter a transcendental state. Now in this case, we're really talking about your other transcendental mental abilities, and you could hold the intention, let's say, to believe something until you enter a transcendental state, or you can hold the intention to create something until you enter a transcendental state too, or control your body in a certain way. So you could do it kind of in a way that just reflects the specific transcendental mental ability you're trying to charge. In the case of emotion, it was just holding emotion because that was the mental ability you want to charge. However, when you're charging for the purpose of performance, the intention that you would hold to entering a transcendental state is a bit broader than simply saying create or move this way. So that's why I just put perform. I'll explain that a little bit more, or it'll make a little more sense after this second point. So to go over the second point, and this is where things kind of change a little bit more from the case of emotions, you would hold the intention to perform in some way while also performing an activity, right? So in the case of emotion, we said try to do two things at once, right? Hold an intention to feel an emotion while telling a story. But for the case of transcendental performance, you would hold the intention to perform in some way while also, so the second thing you're going to be doing is performing an activity. So this is actually the much more general sort of perspective or rule for charging subconscious energy. Now, when case of charging emotions, that was actually a special case where the activity was pretty much just telling a story, right? That's why I didn't really highlight it, the activity part of it, when talking about charging emotions. But for charging your subconscious for transcendental performance, the activity is pretty much going to be a very broad number of things. It could technically be anything, right? So if let's say I want to charge for transcendental performance for or I should say the activity itself could be writing a song, right? It could be singing. It could be playing basketball or boxing. It could be making beats on my computer. It could be being a conversationalist, right? If I'm trying to charge for transcendental performance in conversation. Let's say I want to be a comedian. I could charge my subconscious to tell jokes, which is transcendental creativity, while on stage, right? So being on stage and a monologue would be the activity. If I want to charge my subconscious for transcendental intelligence, the activity could be solving math problems. So whatever the case, right, the activity is very, very, very general. It could pretty much be anything, but the activity would always be the what you're doing that you want to be able to perform transcendentally in, right? So if I want to play basketball at a transcendental level, then I would hold the intention to perform in some way while playing basketball. That would be the activity, or that's while I'm performing the activity. If I want to charge for transcendental performance to make good beats on my computer, the activity would be making beats on my computer. So as I'm making beats, as I'm on my computer making beats, I would hold the intention to perform in some way, right? So the activity is always going to reflect where you want to perform transcendentally, right? It could also technically be something you're just doing in your mind, right? If I'm just performing calculations in my mind, I could charge it to perform that activity very well. But for the moment, I really want to specifically focus on real-world activities rather than an activity in your mind. Like I said, when charging emotion, the activity is mostly just in your mind, but you can do it while focusing on things in the real world too. And going back here, so when you hold the intention to perform in some way, right, or basically as you're trying to get your subconscious to be quantized, right, by the actually, let me go over this first point. I forgot to actually mention it. So before, you basically want your subconscious to be quantized in a way that's also related to the activity, right? So that it charges at the proper frequency that's going to make sense for the way you want to perform, right? Well, in the case of emotions, right, telling a story was what we did to cause our conscious mind to express an intention, right, whose command components properly quantize our subconscious and get it to the right frequency, so we charge some emotion. Well, that same principle is involved in charging for performance, but it's going to really be the activity itself that helps to quantize your subconscious. So when you're performing some activity, right, whether it be writing lyrics for a song, it could be making beats on my computer, it could be talking to people in conversation or socializing, it could be singing, right? So whatever it is, the activity itself is going to cause you to produce intentions that will actually quantize your subconscious. Now the thing is, and to go over this point actually first, is that different frequencies can be used for the same activity, and certain activities will favor certain frequencies. So basically what I mean by that is that because the activity itself is causing you to produce intentions that quantize your subconscious, or basically keep it around a certain frequency, then certain activities, just like certain stories, will favor certain frequencies. So let's say I want to charge charge my subconscious at the frequency of peace or inner peace. That's going to be a hard frequency to charge if I'm boxing, right? If I'm in the ring boxing an opponent, right? Why? Because the intentions I would generally be producing while boxing someone are not going to favor the frequency of inner peace. On the other hand, if I'm, meditating in a monastery with monks or something like that, right? That would be an easy activity, right? That would favor the inner peace frequency. Or from just talking to monks about, universal love or universal peace or something, right? So that activity would favor that frequency. But boxing would not, right? So different activities will actually favor certain frequencies. If I'm in a boxing ring, that might favor a frequency of aggression, right? Or ambition, right? Same thing with sports. Like if you're in sports in general, that'll favor the frequency of ambition or determination. Now, what's also true is this first point here is different frequencies can be used for the same activity. So this part's important, right? Because when we charge emotion, our goal really was just to keep our subconscious charging right around a specific frequency, so we just feel that emotion more and more and more. Transcendental performance is a little different, right? Because your goal isn't to feel a particular emotion or keep your subconscious at a frequency. Your goal is performance, right? So you can actually use different frequencies to achieve different types of transcendental performance. So for example, if I'm in a basketball game, let's say I hold the intention to win, right? That's it. I just hold the intention to win and keep holding that intention while performing that activity, right? We'll go over a little bit more about what happens when I do that, but let's just say for a moment, my subconscious charges, right, according to whatever frequency is associated with that intention, right? Because the intention I hold is the intention my subconscious will be quantized by. But I hold that intention while performing the activity of playing basketball. Well, it's going to charge up at some frequency related to the intention to win. And I'll be able to perform transcendentally in the way that reflects that intention. Now, at the same time, I can also hold the intention to completely destroy my opponent, right? So I can hold that intention while playing basketball, or actually I'll go over another example of that in a moment. But if I hold that intention, my subconscious will still charge up, and I'll still be able to perform transcendentally according to that intention, or the frequency associated with that intention. So as you can see, I can use different frequencies to perform transcendentally. It's not like I have to stick to one type of intention or one type of frequency. And what I was going to say is Deontay Wilder, he's a boxer, right? So he actually said something that was a lot of people kind of took very negatively, which it was a negative statement, but I understood it, what he was talking about on a subconscious level. He actually said, I think it was on the Breakfast Club, he said something about how he wants to kind of, I don't know how, YouTube is censored or whatever, so I'll say he wants to unalive his opponent. That's the word that people use, right, when they don't want to say the real thing. But he says he wants to unalive his opponent, right, in the boxing ring. A lot of people took that like, why would you want to actually, unalive him? right? It's just a fight. You know what I mean? It's not that serious. It's not personal like that. You want to win, and you hope he goes home to his family. The opponent goes home to their family, and that they're okay, right? But people are thinking about what he's saying on a conscious level. You're not thinking subconsciously, right? Which is what I was talking about before, is a form of subconscious dissonance. That's not exactly how I define subconscious dissonance, but I think you get what I'm saying. What he's saying is that he uses that intention to cause his subconscious to charge up in a specific way. Because when you produce an intention like that, your subconscious switches to a certain frequency, and it'll quantize, that intention will quantize your subconscious to a specific frequency, and that frequency will affect your transcendental performance. It'll affect how you perform, right? We'll talk more about that when we talk about organization and transcendental creativity. So we'll talk about, there's a little more to explain about the relation between the frequency and how you perform. But for now, just know that exactly like I said, different frequencies, you can use different frequencies for some type of transcendental performance. There's no one frequency that you should use, right? It's pretty much just your judgment and your sort of preference on what frequency you think will be good for a certain type of way you want to perform transcendentally, right? And so, like I said, in his case, he uses that intention, right? I want to unalive my opponent because it causes his subconscious to charge in a very, very aggressive and violent way, and he taps into that and when he's trying to reach a transcendental level of performance. You could have just as easily used the intention, I will win, or I'm going to crush my opponent, or you can use the intention that says, I'm going to win without hurting my opponent. You could still do that and reach a transcendental level, right? Maybe that'll be better for a more defensive level of transcendental performance, right? And so that's kind of, just to go back here, that's why I said hold the intention to perform, right? Because it's the intention you hold as it relates to the frequency your subconscious goes to when you're performing transcendentally is much more broad than it was for charging emotions, right? And as you get used to charging your subconscious to perform transcendentally in some certain specific circumstances, you may start to, you'll get more experience at which intentions are better for you and that you prefer more. But you can pretty much hold almost any kind of intention, right, while performing transcendentally, but still you want a frequency that favors the activity, right? It's not going to make any sense if I'm in a boxing ring and I hold the intention to feel inner peace while boxing. I could actually do that too, right? And I could probably still perform in a transcendental way. I think they probably do that in some of the, I've seen some movies where they're practicing Tai Chi or they're using Tai Chi Kung Fu and they're super calm while fighting. I don't know if that's really true, but suffice it to say, certain frequencies will not make a lot of sense, right, in terms of your transcendental performance for that activity, right? One last thing I wanted to also mention is that sometimes antithetical frequencies could be charged relative to some activity. And what I mean by that is you can have frequencies that are completely opposite each other or are difficult to charge together, but they actually both favor the same activity, right? So as an example, I pretty much mentioned before, I used to have a lot of social anxiety, right? Especially when I had to speak in front of a group, right, in my job. And so what I learned was that if I had a lot of fun, or if I focused on having fun, it was a lot easier. Now, why is that the case? Well, because if I focus on having fun, what actually ends up happening is my subconscious switches to that frequency, and then my perception becomes altered, and the activity itself looks like I'm having a fun, good time at a party or something, right? So there's no reason to feel anxiety if everything looks like a party. And the socializing fun frequency favors the activity of being around people in a discussion, right? On the other hand, if I'm charging the frequency of anxiety, where on that frequency, I guess you would think everyone's judging you as something, that frequency also favors that activity. If I'm in a group speaking and everyone's potentially able to judge me, so both frequencies will favor the activity, right? If I want to charge my subconscious in a transcendental way, in a negative way, which makes my performance terrible, it would still be transcendental in that case, even if it's a negative outcome, right? But it would be transcendental at a negative frequency, which it would hurt my performance. And it would basically cause my performance to change in a way I don't want, but it would still go beyond my negative negative mind's performance capability, right? Obviously, I want to charge at a positive frequency. So if I focus on having fun in that same circumstance of being in front of a group, giving some speech or something, then it helps a lot more, right? Because now I'm going to see it as a party, and it's like I can have a good time, like I'm at a party, and I can perform transcendentally as if at a party. So that's important. Certain activities will actually favor what to the subconscious is basically like opposite frequencies. So yeah, that was I kind of want to explain all of that with just that portion of the intention and holding intention, the frequencies. So now we're going to go over the next point. So when you actually go in a transcendental state while you're performing some activity, what ends up happening now is your positive mind or your subconscious instinct basically gets more involved in the activity, right? So to go over this point, when in a transcendental state, try to continue to perform the activity using your positive mind. So it's really no different than what we talked about with emotion, right? So with emotion, you held the intention to feel an emotion, right, until you enter the transcendental state, while also telling a story. And then when you enter a transcendental state, so your mind enters like a daydream-like state, you want to now stop trying to hold the intention, stop focusing on holding an intention, and stop trying to do things as much with your negative mind, and try now to start doing everything with your instinct. Which, like I said, when you think with your instinct or use your instinct to do stuff, you just do it, right? It has a feeling of just doing it. It's not premeditated calculation or rationality, or you're not applying logic to it. You just do it in the moment. And you use the part of your mind called instinct. So you should have really practiced that with all the, with what we talked about in the last two chapters, but I'm just saying. But you would do that same thing with an activity. So, like I was saying before, you would take over, when you're telling a story, when you're charging for emotion, you would try to take over, you would try to use your subconscious instinct to continue telling a story. When you're in a transcendental state. And when you're performing, when you're charging for transcendental performance, you would use your subconscious instinct to continue performing whatever activity you're doing, right? So if I was singing, right, let's say I want to charge my subconscious to sing, right? So I want to sing transcendentally. I would hold some intention related to singing, right? And I actually talked a little bit about this in, I think it was chapter 3. I would hold some intention to perform in some way related to singing. And then when I enter a transcendental state, I would now try to sing using my subconscious instinct, right? Which is a form of transcendental control. But I would try to sing at the level of instinct, so not necessarily using my negative-minded level of control. I would use my positive mind's level of control. And I would do that basically until I fall out of a transcendental state, so it would only be a few seconds. And then I would just do it again, right? So when I fall out of that state, I would do it again. I would hold the intention to sing in some way while I'm actually singing, so singing's the activity. And then as I enter a transcendental state, I would stop trying to control and do everything with my negative mind as much, or my conscious mind, and then I would try to use my subconscious instinct to continue to sing. And so, now one thing I want to go over here is that it's generally going to feel, when you're doing this, it's generally going to feel like you're using an excitement burst charge. So we talked about in chapter 12 how your subconscious can actually charge, has two components to charging, right? So it has a purity component, which just describes how much your subconscious is charging at a single frequency. At any given time, it's always charged up at multiple frequencies. When we talk about charging in general, we just mostly mean focusing on one of them, but you always have multiple frequencies in your subconscious memory and in your short-term memory, which impacts your mood. However, the other component of charging is the intensity. And we talked about how there are two types of intensities. There's the calm burst and there's the excitement burst. And when you're charging emotions, you generally want to use a calm burst. At least to me, it feels better, right? And the body is more accepting of a calm burst charge. The body has much more trouble with an excitement burst charge, at least if you hold it for a long period of time. It is not really that much of a problem in the beginning. If you hold it like more than 2 days, it starts to be too taxing on the body. But for transcendental performance, you're generally going to want to use an excitement burst charge, right? So, like I said before, on a level of instinct, you want to do a burst or excitement burst. You want to try to use your subconscious mind or use your instinct to sort of push. You would give it like a push or burst of effort with your subconscious. And so let's say I'm singing, right, at a subconscious, I'm charging my subconscious to sing and perform singing at a transcendental level. On a subconscious level, when I'm trying to use my instinct to continue the act of singing, I would feel like a burst of effort to sing or burst of control. So like I said, when you laugh, right, that's a subconscious burst. That's an excitement burst. Right? Even when you cry, I would still describe that as an excitement burst, right? You're not calming into the crying, right? You kind of do a burst of control in some way. So this will take a little bit of practice. I recommend to practice bursting with emotions so you kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about. But when you charge for performance, you're going to notice that that part of your mind is kind of doing the same thing. It's bursting, right? If you try to calm yourself too much while performing, you're just going to notice it's going to be harder to maintain a transcendental performance, right? In general, you can still do it, but in my opinion, most forms of transcendental performance will favor an excitement burst charge. So now to go over this other point, you must also acquiesce to the compulsion from your positive mind for performance. And that's basically very simple. So like when you feel the need to laugh, right? So laughter is a form of transcendental control. When your subconscious charges at the laughter frequency, you feel compulsion to laugh. Now your negative mind can still resist it, right? But you know what it's like when you're trying to hold back a laugh, right? But if you acquiesce or give in to that compulsion or that urge, then you just laugh naturally, right? So that same thing happens when you're trying to perform transcendentally, right? When you're performing some activity, let's even say it's writing lyrics, right? Something like that, which is transcendental creativity. You would feel an urge of some kind to combine your words in a certain. We'll talk more about that. Has to do more with organization, which we'll talk about later. But you'll feel a compulsion to sort of organize your words into or arrange them in a specific pattern, right? Now, if you resist that urge, your negative mind can resist the urge to do that. But if you sort of give into it and acquiesce to it, it's going to feel more natural to organize your words that way. That's how transcendental creativity works. And so you notice the same thing with singing. If I'm charging my subconscious to sing, which is transcendental control, and when I'm entering a transcendental state, I'm going to feel a compulsion to sort of move my body in a certain way, move my voice, or inflect my voice in a certain way, breathe in a certain way, right? I'll have to sort of relax my negative mind, give in to that urge, or acquiesce to that compulsion. And then when I do that, my positive mind will essentially kind of take over and start doing the controlling kind of what I'm doing. Or I'll start performing using my positive mind instead of my negative mind. Right, and that's what allows me to perform at a transcendental level. What I should have mentioned up here, which I actually am going to talk a little more about in another video, but just like before, when you hold intention to enter a transcendental state, your mind's going to try to enter a daydream-like state, and you kind of have to relax your mind and allow it to enter that daydream or transcendental state. So you would do that same thing while performing an activity, right? And then as you do it, instead of having a daydream that's just like in your mind, you would still enter that same state, but your subconscious would be focused on the environment around you, right? Not necessarily just focused in your own imagination as much, right? So that's what happens. But we're going to still talk about that, I believe, in one of the other. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a later video. Now to go over this next point, this is important too. So this kind of goes without saying, but I just want to clarify it for the just to be sure. So you cannot realistically acquiesce to every compulsion from the subconscious instinct, right? You must balance acquiescence with resistance. And so what I'm saying there is if you're entering a transcendental state and charging your subconscious to tell some story in your mind, it's really not consequential if you acquiesce to whatever compulsion your subconscious instinct is giving you, because your subconscious instinct still has a certain degree of freedom after quantization. So you obviously can't just is going to be consequential, let me put it that way, if you're charging and you have to give into your subconscious instinct in real world activities, right? So if I'm charging my subconscious in the activities conversation, let's say I want to charge to be more interesting or exciting, right? There will certainly be compulsions from my subconscious instinct that aren't going to make sense to do in the real world. Like if my compulsion is to curse someone I'm talking to out, right? I don't want to give in to that compulsion, but it might still come up, right? Because your subconscious doesn't have the quality of rationality to it. Your negative mind has that, but your positive mind doesn't. So sometimes it's obviously going to compel you in a way that's going to make you want to give you an urge to do something that'll get you in a lot of trouble, right? If you were to actually do it in the real world. So you can't, realistically, you can't just give in to every single compulsion that your subconscious is trying to compel you to have, right? As you're charging it. So you're going to have to resist some of them, right? If you feel some compulsion to do something you know will get you in trouble, you say no, right? I don't want to do that, right? And then as you keep charging, you might get another compulsion that is more realistic, right? But you just want to keep that in mind. If you resist every compulsion too much, then your subconscious is not going to charge properly because you keep producing an intention to resist, right? So your subconscious will charge in a way that reflects resistance. So this is actually another example of subconscious dissonance, right? Where the conscious mind produces intention that causes the subconscious to charge in a way that creates an undesired outcome. But that's just the breaks, right? The conscious mind speaks a different language for the subconscious, and sometimes they just don't always mix that well. But, this is important to be aware of when charging the subconscious for transcendental performance. We're going to talk about this again, about that same principle later, right? And when we talk about transcendental creativity. But to go over this last point, by going in and out of a transcendental state while performing an activity, a subconscious path forms in subconscious memory. Subconscious memories making up the path become more positive, and the subconscious becomes more volatile to the activity. So to put everything back in terms of what we were talking about before with subconscious paths, as I keep going in and out of a transcendental state while performing some activity, right? My subconscious, actually, I think we talk about this more in the next section. But for now, I'll just say it. When you keep going in and out of a transcendental state while performing some activity, subconscious, you'll continue to perform the activity in a fairly linear way, right? And whether I'm in conversation or I'm singing or I'm writing lyrics, right? There's a linear quality to it that the subconscious recognizes. And as I keep doing it over and over again, a subconscious path will form in subconscious memory. And that subconscious path, as I keep going in and out of a transcendental state, it's like I keep repeating the path over and over. And this makes more sense if it's a category charge. And we're going to talk a little more about that later. So there's a little more to talk about that, to describe about what's happening here, but we'll talk about that a little later. But for now, just know that as you keep repeating an activity over and over, a subconscious path forms, which is likely consist of categories as the subjects, or the categories are associated with the subconscious memories. And that subconscious path will charge, right? Because you keep going in and out of a transcendental state as you traverse the path over and over. So that path gets more positive, right? And it charges. And as your subconscious charges, it gets more volatile. So as you perform that activity more and more, then you keep accessing the subconscious path. And because that subconscious path makes you very volatile, you'll go in and out of a transcendental state while performing the activity. And that, of course, represents transcendental performance, right? So every time you go into a transcendental state, you perform using your positive mind, and then you get transcendental performance. So I know that was probably a lot. Like I said, there's more to discuss. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the finer points in the other videos. I think maybe the next about the next 2 or 3 sections, we'll cover some additional things about this same thing. We'll just go into slightly more specific details. But this is the general framework for how you would charge a subconscious path. So like I said, I know it's kind of a lot. Like I said, this is probably the most theory-intense chapter, so I recommend you rewatch the video. I feel like I keep saying that, but rewatch the video. If you felt like it was tough to understand, you can also read the book or watch the website. But this took me a long time to come up with these ideas. But you want to try to understand them on a conscious level, just in terms of your negative mind, and then you want to practice them. So I feel like you're really going to get an idea of what I'm talking about when you actually practice this stuff, right? And as you get used to it, then you're really going to start to feel more comfortable charging for transcendental performance, and like you're more in control of the process. But there's still a lot more we have to talk about. but this is just a general framework. I think in the next section, we're going to talk about something I call energy catching, which has to do with it's kind of the difficulty of entering a transcendental state and acquiescing while performing an activity as compared to how I was telling a story. Right? Excuse me, so yeah, that's it for now though, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.